Hi, Kate. Welcome to the FINITE Podcast.
Hi, Jody. Excited to be here.
I'm very excited to have you here. Today, we are talking about synthetic data, which is a I've just started hearing it pop up everywhere. So it's kind of just entering the ether, I feel like, for marketers. So I'm sure listeners will be very interested in exploring this topic with you. But before we do that, I would love it if you could give us a bit of an overview, a highlight reel of your background and experience so far in marketing, how you got into marketing, and where you are now.
Sure. Well, I spent my 20s with a consumer brand. I started my own shoe company. Jody, I was a shoe designer. I had stores in a couple of cities, loved that work, but I felt like I wanted to do something more deeply technical. I was a bit obsessed with technology. And funny thing about making shoes for a living is that it's not a very technical craft. So I was lucky enough to join a company called Cisco, a deep tech company in Silicon Valley, as their head of innovation. They were looking for an entrepreneur in residence, and with my startup background and consumer background, I fit the bill. So I spent 10 years building innovations and companies with them. And what was interesting is that probably really started my journey about how hard it can be to get a view of the customer needs and wants and desires that's not just the right answer about what our customers want, but also we need an answer that everybody can agree on, especially as our organizations get larger. It's not enough to get the right answer. You got to get the right answer that everybody can be comfortable with. And so that can be some of the problems we have, whether it's synthetic data or even like a survey response. If folks around our business don't believe it, don't get it, our agency doesn't believe it, doesn't get it, we're not going to get very far with it. So this is kind of where I started to understand this problem really deeply when I was trying to build, products and startups and the like for Cisco. It's like, I don't just need the right answer. I need an answer everybody gets and can get behind. And so, yeah, from my time at Cisco, I spent 3 years as a partner in BCG's digital ventures business, where it was my job to create digital attacker brands for really big brands. And that's when I felt that pain even more keenly. I would be in this tiny little startup on the edge of a big bank or a big telco. And, I had heard something from the customer. But the minute it came time to move everybody, move the hundreds of people with me on this journey, often I found, oh, but is that really our customer? And is that the customer that matters? And oh, that was, that survey you did. But, I don't know if I believe in the technique or the technology that you use to get that answer. And I think what I thought of this morning in the shower is much more important. And so that's what I want us to do now. And so, what I found is, especially as organizations get to a certain size, we need the right answer. And then we need it to be something everybody can get behind if we're going to get anywhere with it. So, that's where I kind of started to kind of fall in love with this idea of like, we need the right answer and we need it to be something that we believe in, but we also need it like right now. Like, we need it in this moment. Like while you and I are arguing, Jody, you're a spicy character. I'm a spicy character. We've both got strong views. The time to get the answer to what the customer really wants is right now in this moment. And that's why I started to get really intrigued by the power of technology. How can we get synthetic data that's even better quality than what we might have been able to get if we'd gotten a dozen customers in a room? And how might we use that to move faster and move our brands faster in this current climate?
Yeah, that's a really interesting story there. And it's, yeah, really poignant how you kind of encountered that in your own experience at Cisco. We've had the SVP of marketing at Cisco on the podcast recently, and she only just scratched the surface of all of the kind of momentum that's going on there and how everything has to kind of move in these huge waves to make change. And she's kind of leading that and at the top of that wave. So yeah, really interesting. I'm sure it's a challenge that many of our listeners have dealt with, even in kind of smaller startups and scale ups. When you've got multiple big fish in the small ponds, there can always be those like differences there. So it's interesting that you see data as a source of truth that decisions can depend on. Because data is, it's also quite malleable. You can pick up some bits from it while other people see other bits, it's context dependent, you know. Some people have different perspectives even when leaning on the data, I guess. So, I mean, I'd love to hear more about that in a bit and how you kind of use synthetic data to kind of solve those issues as well. So, I mean, I wanted to acknowledge, first of all, that you do work with and produce synthetic data. So we're getting a very kind of set perspective, a very, very valuable one. And I'm so interested to hearing it more. But I just wanted to put it out there that, you're a leader in synthetic data and that's the angle. But I would love to hear your definition of synthetic data. What actually is it? Can you be as clear as possible?
Yeah, so look, let's start from the beginning. Not all synthetic data is created equally. And I want to start by acknowledging those listeners today that have started playing in this space and felt really disappointed by some of the outcomes. Like all nascent technology, if the data synthesizes the wrong thing, then we're going to end up with terrible results. I just want to start there. Where I want to start is that so much market research that is done using kind of shaky techniques to start with, surveys where pals are chasing gift cards and, you know, interviewees that want to be a good participant. They want to tell us that they like our products. So many parts of market research that are shaky, and there are so many parts of market research that are really rich and incredibly valuable. I, for one, are a huge fan and still conduct for Heatseeker right now. We conduct incredibly high quality ethnography where we spend a lot of time belly to belly with our customers, with marketers that use our data, following them around in a really weird way. That form of research, I really believe, observational, behavioral market research is incredibly valuable. However, we all know that there's a lot of eh, preponderance to buy surveys and do you like this over that? We all know that that kind of data is disastrous in quality. And we're all, as marketers, we're often involved in a dance. So often I hear, if I don't give my CFO a survey that says the likelihood to buy is above X, I won't get my budget, so I won't be able to run my campaign, so I won't sell anything, and nothing will work. And so we know it's a bit shaky. The CFO probably knows it's a bit shaky, but there's nothing else available to us as marketers, so we kind of have to roll with it. I feel as a marketer myself, that makes me really sad. I mean, CFOs, now that I'm picking on them, they have first class tooling. At any given moment, a CFO can tell you down to the decimal point how many dollars and cents are in the bank and what the discounted cash flow is and what the dollars are going to be next week and what the likelihood of the pipeline is. Like they have all of that clarity, but we as marketers, we often don't. We don't often have it in real time. And there's often data in there that's really shaky. And so that makes me really uncomfortable. So I think before we even start about synthetic data, we need to talk about what are those synthetics trained on. And so I believe in leveraging the highest quality data to train our synthetics, and that is an incredibly important part of the process. It's a rubbish in, rubbish out situation when it comes to synthetics. So let's start with that. Your data should be purely behavioral. I know that's a bit of a shock to those of us who do a lot of insights work or come from an insights background. That was my role at BCG, was running all of that strategic design work and research, is that we really need to be purely behavioral. So let's not ask a customer or a user to speculate about what they might do. Let's present them with stimulus in their natural habitat and see how they respond to it. So that's what Heatseeker uses. We use a technique where you give us a growth question. What's the most important job to be done? What's the most important human friction that you're facing? What's the buying driver that you would respond to? And we craft a panel of ads that we publish in the real world, and we see how people respond to those ads. They don't know that they're in a study. They click on those ads. They fill out forms. Their lead will be processed like any other lead by the brands that we work with. And in this way, we get purely behavioral data. So there's very few questions that you would put in a survey that we can't actually structure into a behavioral study in that way. So that's the first thing is like, let's move to a purely behavioral way of collecting data. So experiments is one way. First party data is another. Let's get your shopping cart data. Let's get your loyalty plan data. Let's get your customer interviews. It's funny, we train a lot of our synthetics on customer calls. And we all know there's often a lot of complaints in there. Sometimes the synthetic personas that we build based on that data are very spicy and have very strong views about about your product and how they're trained. But that's because we're using that truly behavioral data. So we find a blend of purely experiment based behavior like big data plus your first party data gives you a pretty full picture of everywhere from awareness through to advocacy on the customer journey. We can train using real behavioral data. So let's start with getting you the best quality data to train your synthetics. And then the next step when it comes to creating, a synthetic persona in our case, most of our customers consume their synthetics by talking to them, to talking to their segment for the first time. So rather than your segment being on a PowerPoint deck that sits in the drive somewhere that I click on occasionally, we turn your performance marketing data, we turn your customer calls, we turn the experiments that we run to you into somebody that you can talk to. It turns out people know how to talk to people, so we don't have to train them on anything fancy when it comes to their synthetics. Talk to an avatar of your customer and use that to riff with, why didn't you like my campaign 6 months ago? It was my favorite. Why don't you like my idea? And can you be my co-pilot and help me write the copy, design the campaign brief? Can you evaluate this creative I've gotten from my agency to tell me how it's going to respond? And do that as yourself. Do that as the segment that you represent so that I can move faster as a marketer. What we found at Heatseeker is when we originally started our company, we just used to be in the insights business. But it turns out, Jody, that the truth hurts. When you give people an insight, all you've done is make them sad and give them a lot of homework. What we find now is that putting your personas to work, help me craft what you need, help me write a call center script that you will respond to, help explain my outage of the internet, or my telco in words that you will understand and that you won't find offensive. And those are all real world examples of how our customers are using their synthetic personas right now to solve the problems that marketers have.
That is absolutely fascinating that you're kind of distilling all of this data into is it one agent? How many agents or kind of personas would a typical client have to represent the kind of broad set of their target audience?
Yeah, I mean, we usually build a persona for every high potential segment that they serve. And so we have some customers that have many, many. And every time, when we have one customer in the consumer space that does a lot of big partnerships with other big brands. And as you know, when you do a big partnership with another big brand, there's your customers, there's their customers, but who on earth would be both? And that's a new customer that we need to understand really fast. We need to find out exactly who it is that is responding to that. And so that's a really great example of, it takes us just 8 to 10 days to do all of the experiments that we need to build you a synthetic persona from scratch. And so it's a great example. You got a brand new partnership. It's going to launch in 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever it is. And my God, you better make sure that the whole campaign launch hits right the first time, that the performance marketing is just right, that the website's just right, the landing pages are just right. And the best person to do that is the persona that represents the exact audience that's going to respond to that. So it's a really clever way that people are putting our personas to work.
Yeah, that is super clever, and I didn't kind of imagine it as so kind of personal and also almost like human-like and like you can kind of interact with the agents who are totally representative of your target audience. How does it account for nuance within that audience? And could it potentially be an oversimplification. How much can we really kind of create broad strokes over a whole kind of population of people and kind of predict them to be acting in the same ways and thinking the same things in every scenario?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. So, first of all, the personas are supposed to be mathematically representative of the group they've been chosen to represent. So, I want them to some degree to lack, some of the nuance because I want you to count on what they're saying. Like, we've all listened to a focus group where, like, noisy Frank in the corner sounded like he was making so much sense. But we didn't quant that qual, and all of a sudden, we launched the thing and it's not quite right. Noisy Frank in the focus group didn't actually represent the many folks in that segment. We deliberately make sure that everything the persona says is representative of the group. However, there's a couple of caveats to that. We do listen to customer interviews. If you've done, anthropological style research, ethnographic research, we do listen for the exact verbatims. We listen to the customer calls. And as much as we can, we try to use those verbatims in the personas so that you hear the exact words they use in real life when they're speaking to you. So that's one way that we're really trying to humanize the response. And it is really human, We survey like one of the meal delivery companies, and you'll hear about feeling anxious about the mom tax and, it's 5:17 and, Junior's got sport tonight. And like, you'll hear about that because that will have shown up in an interview. And when we ran the experiment, we were able to see that a statistically significant portion of that segment feels that way. And that's the job that they're doing. However, to your point, like, how do we capture, some of the delicate nuance and find the 17% of folks in the segment that do not represent? So the other piece is just, making more personas. Like, we have another function in our products where we will run a synthetic panel for you. And we will actually train a representative sample of the entire segment. So you can still see, oh, wow, like 59% of this particular segment feel this way, but 17% don't. And those that don't feel that really deeply. And then we can make some decisions about, well, should I run some live experiments and not in the panel and really find out who they are? And maybe build another persona around them so I can speak to them, more deeply. So yeah, we feel that pretty keenly. And so, there is like the real time, while you and I are arguing in the meeting, I just want an answer right this minute. And that it's okay that that answer is just statistically relevant of the whole group. And sometimes when we get into the deeper nuance, I want to know, is that 100% of that group or is it 73% of that group? Am I interested in what that last mile had to say? And then it's a bigger question. Then we run like experiments. They take about 8 minutes to set up. They're done in like 4 to 6 days. And then we get the real people in the real world. And then we can say, oh shit, we've got a group here that we really want to listen to. So it's a really great question and one that we think about really cleanly.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely sense that. And yeah, it's interesting that you look for statistical significance as a first point, but then noticing those kind of big spikes where people feel really strongly. That really explains it. I was going to ask, do you ever kind of overlay anything kind of do you ever manipulate the synthetic data in some kind of way to make the agent say maybe more critical than they would be, or more honest than they would be, or anything to kind of make like optimize, say, those synthetic survey participants to be better survey participants?
Okay, so we start with the quant. So if you think about the training data we have, we start with these live experiments we do in the real world. And the beauty of that, there's no one in there that's worried about being a good participant. There's no one there who's worried about hurting the interviewer's feelings. There's no one in that mix that's like, well, if I don't tell this person what I want, I won't get my gift card. So we actually remove a lot of that lack of truth telling, because when you're doom scrolling at midnight and you're clicking on something, it's because you want it. It's not because, I'm trying to get something out of, this study that I'm participating. So, like, first and foremost, the personas that we have, I mean, they'll break your heart, and they'll break mine. I mean, it's my products, and I'm watching them speak to a large group of executives that about their brand, and the persona will very articulately explain, your brand stinks. I don't love it, and this is why I prefer your competitor. I mean, you'll realize, Jody, why I had to, like, keep building my products so we would start doing something about that bad news. Because for a long time, we would often just in the bad news business, because these synthetics pull no punches and they just share exactly how they feel about a brand. And so, yeah, we don't have to manipulate, what they say. They what they say is what mathematically they feel, and what they respond to. So, as I said, I mean, we do look for quotes from real customers in that exact segment, in that scenario, whether they've spoken to an interviewer or they've called the call center to complain and they're giving the scenario. I've been waiting for my meal for an hour and now it's cold and my kid has allergies and what am I supposed to do now? Like, if we hear that, we will give that to the persona if we know that that's statistically significant and relevant to the group. So that way, when we're handing a brief over to an agency or to someone, they're getting some of that inspiration. I think that's really important, and it might be where where we wrap is this idea that synthetics should reduce your risk, which allows you to take bolder steps. When we were talking about kind of how this idea came about, it's not enough to have the right idea. You've got to be able to bring everybody with you. And so the problem with synthetic data is often, can everybody trust it? Can we count on it in the same way we used to be able to count on other forms of research? And so what we're able to do now is share, here's all the live market experiments that were supportive of this insight. Here's everything we heard in the performance marketing. We can see a competitor ad that we understand must have performed well because it killed ours that was running at the same time. So we're able to give all of that data to back up the insight that we have. And then when we have bold ideas, we'll often say, I mean, of course we can test them synthetically, but we can also test them perhaps unbranded under an incognito brand in the real world. And that's what we want to give marketers the permission to do. I really believe AI marketing is not about a race to the bottom. It's not about a race to the most boring, most sad creative. Oh, that's because AI doesn't know how to swing for the fences. With the right testing and the right data, we should be able to take a really bold strategy, to finance and to the board and say, look, we tested this live in the market. We can swing for the fences here. This is something that lights this segment up. This is really important to them. And this sort of edgy creative that we're using with this edgy celebrity is really who they want to hear from right now. And so we really want to support marketers with not just the right answer, but, the evidence that they need and get it in a timely way too, so that they can take everybody with them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that summary. You kind of took the words out of my mouth. I was going to ask about the distinction between, using AI to interpret real data versus kind of maximizing data with synthetics. So yeah, it definitely seems like it's all about kind of risk minimization in a way, and almost like the more data you have, the more you can rely on its in its interpretation and what AI interprets from it. But yeah, great summary. I have so many more questions, but yes, I think you're right. I think it's about time to wrap up. I'm sure that the audience has loads of questions as well. Maybe we can get you on a follow-up episode to kind of get more into those and talk about it for now. So much learnings, so much to take away. Thank you so much, Kate. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.